I think we are live, right? So good morning in Brazil, but not only in Brazil. I think it's good night to Matt that is here with us. We are here to open this conference, and I'm really glad to talk a little bit about the Brazilian Institute of Competition and Innovation. IBCI, as we call here in Brazil, is an open, non-profit think tank created in 2012, and is based in a joint initiative of a group of professors. IBCI preaches free initiative, free competition, innovation, and a level playing field to build a more just society with more welfare and less inequality. And we are just talking a little bit about competitive markets. Of course, I think it's important to say that IBCI comprises a multidisciplinary and an equal number of directors. It means we have 50% of women and 50% men, all well known in their respective areas. And I believe for everybody that is watching here us, it's important to see our website. So I am recommending you to visit our website, www.ebcibr.com.br. So let me add a bit about this conference. In this third edition, and looking to convert the crisis caused by coronavirus into an opportunity, we extended our conference to a 3-day and 100% online conference with speakers and panelists from 4 continents. We have people from South America, North America, Europe, and Asia. And this selected group of national and international references will provide participants an in-depth overview of the various topics covered by this conference. We will have just like a competition law and the movie industry, market definition in the digital age, competition challenges in digital markets, competition for transition economies, blockchain code as antitrust, beside others. So it was very difficult to select all these great speakers. And during the organization of this conference, we took special care to avoid academic endogeny and to provide a real debate on different perspectives. It is a conference without any profit or political agenda. All the participants will have access to discussions that will escape from the mainstream, such as the panel on the Austrian school, providing a counterpoint to the traditional schools of antitrust law, economic regulation, and economic development worldwide. As academics and researchers, we intend to provide a dialectical environment for exchange with respect for different perspectives and point of views. And finally, besides IBCR directors, I would like to thank all the directors, but I would like to thank more the academic organizers who made this conference a reality, even in the face of the challenges of homeschooling and social distance, okay? So thank you, Alaís, João José, Isabela Miranda, Marco Aurélio, Mariana Silveira, Tatiana, Vinícius Dias. You're all amazing. Thank you so much for helping us with this conference. So we have here Matt, Radical Xchange CEO. Matt was one of the founders of the movement called Radical Xchange, whom I thank for being here and also for having trusted me in promoting the movement's ideas and values in Brazil. So thank you so much, Matt. It's a pleasure having you here. He has done an extraordinary job. And unfortunately, this year, our conference in Brazil needed to be postponed due to coronavirus. We were expecting to have the Radical Xchange conference here in Brazil. But I believe that having Matt here in this opening is an excellent opportunity to answer this question: is competition and innovation radical? So, well, before I pass it on Matt, I will give the floor to Eduardo so that he can welcome you all, but I would like to thank Matt for everything he's doing. And also I would like to thank all the directors and organizers that made this conference possible. So first, Eduardo, I will give you the floor, and then Matt.
Right, so thank you very much, Juliana and Professor Juliana. I endorse 100% your words about who made it possible in this very tough context. And I will not take longer now, because I will stay on the panel to debate with Matt, because I can give you excuse on your behalf, because I need to leave for other appointments, right? But I thank you very much on behalf of IBCI for this great opening. And Matt, basically Juliana described your bio, right? But I would add some words like you were an antitrust and consumer litigator prior to move to Radical Xchange Foundation. And something that I also think is amazing in your biography is that you are a writer and a programmer. And I do believe that we are in face of a big challenge in the future to build up a new language with a mixture of law and programming. So welcome, Matt. Thank you very much for being here. And we are all here to listen to you.
Thank you so much, Eduardo, and thank you, Juliana, and thank you to the organizers of the conference. I know what a big task it is, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to say a few words to you all today. So let me just share my screen. Okay. So as Juliana and Eduardo said, my name is Matt. I am the president of Radical Xchange Foundation, which is a nonprofit that makes a case for fundamental institutional innovations in democracy and markets. And but before I say a little bit more about our ideas, I want to talk a little bit about what brought me to the work that I'm doing today, because I think I've had a little bit of an unconventional career path. So I think the theme that really runs through my career is the worry about power concentration. There are three sort of events when I look back upon my life that I think formed the viewpoint that I've brought with me into my career. The first is the 1999 .com era. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I witnessed this tremendous speculative bubble in internet businesses that came about during the late 1990s, which was exciting in some ways, and in other ways quite crazy. A lot of people made a lot of money very quickly for doing very little, and when it all came crashing down in early 2000, it was very visible to me that the harms of the crash, in many cases, fell upon people who hadn't really benefited from the boom. Something quite similar happened in 2008, of course. This was a formative event for, I think, many people in my age group. So soon after I graduated from college, it suddenly seemed like all of the jobs that we'd expected would be there were going to be gone. And again, it sort of struck me that that the risks that had been taken by a very small number of people had created a problem that affected the lives of many. I will also say that in the late 2000s, I was in a somewhat lonely position at the time, which was a position of becoming quite worried about what was going on in Silicon Valley. If you rewinding 10 years, it was a very different climate. in the eyes of many people, Silicon Valley could do no wrong. Everything that was going on was great. But around that, I was already worried about the sort of power concentration that was going on in the large Silicon Valley businesses. And this is part of what led me to go to law school. So I studied law at the University of Michigan, partly in order to address a few of these problems. One is these problems of systemic risk, and another is the problem that I perceived of the law being sort of unable to keep pace with technological change and change itself as the technological landscape around changed. After law school, despite promising myself that I would not do this, I found myself working for a big corporate law firm for a while, and left that when the time was right to clerk for a federal judge in New York. And after that clerkship, I decided that I would try to put my degree to use on the problems that motivated me to get into the field. By becoming a plaintiff side antitrust and consumer lawyer. So this allowed me to represent smaller clients, represent larger numbers of people who had been impacted by antitrust matters or consumer matters. And I did this for a number of years, but during that time, a few other trends started to catch my eye. So in 2015, the blockchain platform Ethereum started to really pick up steam, and as a longtime programmer, I became really fascinated by the possibilities of blockchain technology to build systems that would allow power to be more distributed than the sorts of systems that I had been worried about in the financial system or in Silicon Valley. At the same time, I noticed that that the blockchain, the sort of nascent blockchain industry, was home to a lot of the same sort of hyper optimistic utopian rhetoric that I had observed in earlier phases of boom and bust in California's technology business, and this worried me greatly. So, but in any case, I came to the opinion that this was important. I felt that I could make a bigger difference to the problems that mattered by getting into the game and attempting to ensure that this new technological revolution played a role in decentralizing power and distributing power in a more genuine way than previous ones had. So I started to work on building blockchain tools that could help with sort of distributed decision making and other sorts of very fundamental coordination problems. And through that work, realized that in order for these systems to work the way that people were hoping that they would, we were all going to need to get a much better, a much firmer grasp of incentive design. And so it's through that study of incentive design that I came across the research of the economist Glenn Weil, whom I now work with, who's been working in mechanism design and incentive design for many years. And so it was a very exciting event when in 2008, Glenn and his co-author Eric Posner came out with a book called Radical Markets that proposed some really thought-provoking and promising fundamental redesigns to institutions in democracy and markets. And these ideas in this book captured the imagination of many people who were working in the blockchain industry as possible templates for technical architectures that would allow really vital democratic processes and really vital sort of market interactions, really sort of fair market interactions to happen. So what were the ideas in this book? I don't have the time to get into them in great detail, but in in broad strokes, the book Radical Markets depicted a few different fundamental institutional innovations that sort of transcend left-right politics. One of them is something called quadratic voting, which is somewhat counterintuitively, perhaps, of a voting system that makes democracy more flexible and market-like by enabling voters to sort of trade off between different issues they care about and express a stronger opinion in some areas and a weaker opinion in other areas. So it gets some of these, it brings in some of the flexibility of markets to the expression of preference through democracy, but it retains the egalitarian principle of democracy by giving everybody a fundamentally equal vote. Another idea is this idea of self-assessed licenses. So this is a property system that ensures the efficient use of property and also ensures the redistribution of rents from property interests. So once again, it's a property system and a market-based property system, but one that is attentive to the injustices that property interests can bring about and the sort of negative externalities that they sometimes impose upon communities. So marshaling the excitement that book generated, a number of us, set about to work building what has become the Radical Xchange movement. And today, Radical Xchange is a global movement committed to reimagining markets, democracy, property, and much more. Among the leaders of the Radical Xchange movement are Glenn Weil, whom I mentioned, Vitalik Buterin, who is the founder of and the creator of the Ethereum blockchain platform, Danielle Allen, who is really one of the most important political philosophers in the United States today, Audrey Tang, who is one of the world's most important democratic leaders and has been an incredible pioneer in helping Taiwan develop what is now really the world's premier example of a vital digital democracy. Christina Kafara, who is an amazing antitrust expert, Christopher Kulendran Thomas, an incredible conceptual artist, my colleague Jennifer Marone, and many, many more, including Eduardo and Juliana and Vinicius, who are leading an incredible Radical Xchange community in Brazil today. So it's been a really exciting journey, and the sort of essence of the project of Radical Xchange movement is to discover new forms of social organization. So new forms that move beyond the sort of conventional understandings of things like capitalism, that try to move beyond the sort of simple notion of consolidating power in state, and also move beyond the idea of consolidating power in the hands of unaccountable technocrats and experts. So the idea is to collaboratively design and build systems that are market oriented, but are also deeply committed to democracy and to nurturing diversity. So there are a few ideas that I think are really central to understanding what Radical Xchange is about, and why why the sort of intellectual vein that we're tapping into is so productive. And a lot of it has to do with sort of broadening our definitions of typical concepts that come into play in conversations like this. So, for example, perhaps unexpectedly, the work that we're doing points out that private property doesn't always help competition, right? We may be accustomed to thinking about private property competitive markets as things that are aligned with each other. But in fact, private property is also the basis for monopoly, right? Without private property, you don't have monopoly. Private property, allows the holders of whatever the property right is to avoid competition, and sometimes causes assets not to be allocated to their most efficient user, their most efficient, the person in the best position to make positive use of them. Similarly, democracy, perhaps counterintuitively, doesn't always make inefficient decisions. We may be accustomed to thinking that democracy is messy, democracy is slow, and that if you need efficiency, then you need to sort of consolidate power in an autocratic manner, because autocracies move fast and they can be run by experts and so on. But that, again, that's also really, really not true. Autocracies also make bigger errors than democracies, and they have fundamentally less ability to gather information about what their constituents want. Similarly, we are familiar with the idea of efficiency being opposed to the idea of justice, as if we need to make a sort of a trade-off between efficiency and justice. But I think that a broader conception of efficiency, for example, goes beyond just some sort of narrow economic definition and starts to embrace broader forms of welfare, begins to embrace some of the same ideas that are core to justice. So, for example, wherever you see a market inefficiency, one way of understanding what's going on is that somebody is getting less than they deserve or more than they deserve. So wherever you see an inefficiency, you're also seeing an injustice. And that relationship goes two ways. So in the same, in precisely the same way, if we look at the world through a lens of justice, and we see injustices, it's incredibly valuable to realize that wherever we see those injustices, we're also seeing an inefficiency. We're also seeing a missed opportunity for people to participate, for people to be productive, for people to be involved in the economy or in the governance of their own lives. Similarly, competition. I think a deep understanding of the concept of competition is intimately related to the ideas of diversity and broad participation. Extending this idea beyond competition, I think it's also really useful to think about the concept of economic rent. So this is something that's getting increasing attention in the economics literature, and it's intimately related to the issues that we're bringing to light through our work at Radical Xchange. So rent takes many forms. We're all familiar with the idea of monopoly rents, as opposed to competitive profits. But there are other ways of thinking about the difference between sort of, rent and, non-rent profit. One is through this sort of dichotomy between earned and unearned. Another way of thinking about rent is that in the case of rent, risk is externalized as opposed to internalized. And I think another important form that rent takes in the economy today is something like this idea that in some markets, the winners are chosen by the stock market as opposed to by actual consumers. So an interesting example of this is Uber, I think. So Uber and many other big venture capital funded businesses during the past decade or so have come to dominate their industries largely or even exclusively as a result of the fact they've attracted so much investment. In attracting that investment, they're able to get ahead of their competitors before they turn profitable, before they genuinely pass the test of the end user market. So one way of putting that is that consumers didn't choose Uber, investors chose Uber. And this is a really interesting problem. It's something that I think deserves more attention in the coming years. Another important idea is this idea of increasing returns versus diminishing returns to scale. So what we're getting at with this is that increasing returns to scale processes like urbanization or like technological development are processes are first of all the true sources of economic growth. I mean, this is where most growth comes from, and these are processes that move non-linearly and sort of gain strength with the number of participants. So it's true of a network that when one additional person joins the network, it makes the network more valuable for everyone. It's similarly the case with a city that, as cities grow denser and bigger, they create more opportunities for everyone in them. These are the kinds of processes that are responsible for all of the things that we like about modernity. These are the processes that give us the wealth that there is in the world. And when we look at these kind of increasing returns processes, it's important to realize that they are not always well provided for by private property systems, by capitalistic management. So democracy manages these kinds of networked wealth creation processes better than property systems. Strict private property ownership of these networks that generate prosperity leads to inefficiency, it leads to underinvestment, it leads to rent taking, and it leads to the participants in these sort of massive collaborative processes being disempowered from the sources of their own wealth and the processes that are influencing their lives. As technology connects us more tightly, the importance of democracy grows and the importance of private property shrinks. So the need to build better democratic systems to govern these sorts of increasing returns to scale processes is becoming more and more acute as time goes on, because most growth comes from this kind of massive, large-scale collaboration, as opposed to from individual efforts in the way that we may have modeled growth and productivity in the sort of early modern, from sort of an early modern perspective. And you can see this centrality of social processes and collaboration in both the good and the bad sides of these massive internet businesses, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, right? The value that these businesses have generated comes from the aggregation and the sort of collective contribution of the information of many millions of people who've sort of combined their efforts and their information into a network that enable incredibly useful, incredibly productive processes to occur. But because these networks are managed in the service of shareholders, as opposed to in the service of the millions of people who have helped build them and who depend on them, we're seeing all kinds of problems today, from the sort of distortion of democracy to increasing wealth concentration, and as you're all aware, there's antitrust activity going on around the world, looking at these companies, and it's sort of, I think that it brings to light something that has been apparent for a long time, which is that we really need to broaden the paradigms of antitrust to understand what's going on in the 21st century economy. There are other big big issues on the horizon, including AI and machine learning. So I've got this reference to GPT-3 here. That is a language learning model that has kind of been sort of a very, very significant leap forward in the ability of machines to produce meaningful text. I think that it's easy for us to sort of misunderstand what's going on in these artificial intelligence systems and think that, we've just cleverly, built really smart computers. A better way of understanding what's happening is that the data of millions and millions of people who have written text that has gone out on the open internet, or that is been scraped by the algorithms that built GPT-3. All of that collective intelligence, all of that work of millions of people is really going into the system and being fed back out to us as text production. This is a dynamic that we need to be quite concerned about, because what it means is that the parties who are in the best position to sort of crunch and process the most data, presumably because they're the best resource and have the biggest computers, will be able to build the most powerful artificial intelligence systems. This is another sort of vector in which wealth concentration and disempowerment are something we need to be aware of in the coming years. So I'll close with a quick quote from an interesting writer named Irving Kristol, who some of you may know. My reading of history is that in the same way as men cannot for long tolerate a sense of spiritual meaninglessness in their individual lives, so they cannot for long accept a society in which power, privilege, and property are not distributed according to some morally meaningful criteria. I think that this idea really gets at the core of what competition at its best is about, what competition and law at its best is supposed to help provide for, and this is why competition matters. We want as many people as possible to be able to contribute, to be able to have a say in the systems that govern them, and to participate in the economic structures that constitute our society. So that's it for my short presentation. Thanks again, and feel free to email me. I'm always happy to chat. Matt@radicalexchange.org, and I'll hand it back to you, Eduardo.
All right, Matt. Well, as I said to you before we start, I enjoyed very much your presentation. It calls our attention for the roots of competition and of capitalism and of our social systems, right? And while we were, presenting, I happened to select 5 points that I would not actually call questions, right? But 5 points. 4 that are related to your main speech, and the 5th one is somehow related to your speech, but it leads us to our second panel of the conference today. And I'm very fortunate to be here to talk to you now and to see this happening in reality, because it's really rare for us to have such a discussion and looking upon the future, and not always discuss about the past and about the traditional tools, the dogmatic tools that we know will no longer work, right? So, but you mentioned many interesting reasonings, many interesting thoughts. But I would start from like a personal curiosity of myself, and I believe actually that I have on how to build more efficient tools to regulate power situations or power exercise situations in the future, right? But I would like to hear from you. What is exactly to be programmer? Because I came from the legal world, right? And it's really tough. I would say not to me now because I study a lot about programming. What is that for? But I'm still incapable of comprehending the phenomena. But what is like to be a programmer? Would you be able to describe it like for dummies? And how do you see a possible combination of the legal provisions, right, and the programming activity?
Yeah. So there's a few. I mean, there's many things to say about that. One thing I'll say is that, first of all, when I first started the journey of teaching myself about computer science and learning how to learning how all this stuff worked, one of the things that immediately became apparent to me is that I started to understand the meaning of the word hacker, of the sort of why that term is so popular, because in order to build computer systems, it's often important, and in fact, it's almost always happening that that the people building the system don't understand every level of the system. So, in other words, in order to do anything as a software engineer or as a programmer, you have to sort of focus on the level that is most salient to you, and not necessarily get distracted by the really fundamental elements of how all of the software is working. And I think this is useful to understand because it's true in many cases that the technical systems we're using are not even fully or deeply understood by the people who've built them. This is something that can be misunderstood by outsiders. We put the technical expertise up on a real pedestal, but the reality is that so-called technical experts often don't deeply understand what they're doing. Another important kind of connection between law and code is has to do with the way that sort of legal rules can be embedded in like blockchain smart contracts, which I also think is quite interesting, because there's a fundamental difference in the way that rules can be that rules are enforced or enacted when they're sort of just enforced by like an automated system versus when they are enforced by, let's say, a court. And the fundamental difference is the key word understanding the difference is interpretation. So when a judge looks at a legal rule and looks at a case and decides how that legal rule applies to the case before him or her, they have to interpret the rule. They have to think about how it maps on to the facts before them. This is a very human process. It involves a very in a way, like the most human form of intelligence. And when a technical system enforces a rule, when a blockchain smart contract is just triggered, there is no interpretation happening at all. It is simply, I'm not sure if this analogy works cross-culturally, but it's basically a Rube Goldberg machine. It's just an automatic system that, you know, one thing triggers another thing, and it just automatically does what it's going to do without any exercise of intelligence at all. Which means that that it is radically harder to build a sort of automatic, pre-coded legal rule versus you know the traditional human process because it's so inflexible.
Yeah, and I see. You know, if I got it right, so it's basically you have an analogical process in courts and have a digital process like 0101 in the programming, right?
Yeah, or I mean, I would almost say, you know, it's a human process versus an automatic process is another way of thinking about it.
No, thanks. Thank you very much. Very clarifying. And still, I see you mentioned power, right? And I believe you mentioned economic power that led you to this path, right? To concentration of power and reducing of diversity or choices, right? And you place competition in a broader sense, and there are some criticism over it. I mean, from the traditionalists, Borg followers, right, that believes in consumer welfare, and others that believe antitrust or competition is quite broader than this. And I do believe it's quite broader, but though I'm not name myself a hipster antitrust, right? That's fun. But I see this sort of reasoning, competition as a path to diversity. What's nice and proper as a monopoly or a basis for monopoly. This deal me to the other. I made some questions already. Okay, to the other comment or question that. How would you deal, and it is related to a question that was presented by one of our colleagues in Brazil that are part of the Xchange group here in Brazil. Her name is Bruna Alencar. Thank you, Bruna. And how to deal, how to apply this, in your opinion, or if we have a path to go through. Is it possible to apply this reasoning of competition as diversity and property as monopoly in the tech ecosystems, or to review or to scrutinize the ownership over the ecosystems? How would you reconcile these three ideas: competition as diversity, property as monopoly, and the ownership of the ecosystems?
Sure. So in terms of competition as diversity, the insight for me is simply that well, what one insight is that you know, efforts to open up institutions and, you know, make sure that that people from historically disadvantaged groups and things like that are able to participate in competitive ecosystems, are able to work in important institutions and start businesses and participate in economic systems. This is a central problem for competition, right? This isn't something that is irrelevant to competition. As you know, as long as we have sort of systemic biases that allow people from certain groups and not others to have opportunities, we don't have real competition. So that's one thing, and then on the topic of ownership, I would say that there's a lot of interesting innovation going on around distributed systems of ownership. So there are a few folks that I know are a professor named Nathan Schneider, a young lawyer named Camille Canon, who are doing great work on things like steward ownership and what Nathan calls exit to community. So these are sort of alternative ways of structuring equity and of structuring control over economic institutions that provide new avenues for the value created by businesses to be shared, and that create new avenues for the power that businesses accrue to be shared and opened up to democratic processes. So I think that areas of research like that, like exit to community and steward ownership, are really important. And I also think there's a great global effort going on in multiple jurisdictions to consider new modes of sort of stakeholder control, how to get representation of different sorts of parties on corporate boards and things like that. These are all really important avenues to solve what is ultimately a competition problem, by enabling broader control.
Very nice, thank you. And last but not least, Matt, in terms of social forms beyond capitalism, statism, and technocracy, that I just catch it from your presentation, that can nurture increasing returns from cooperative diversity. Fantastic objective, I would say, a goal. And would you classify, or do you see the blockchain community or the blockchain technology as one of these forms?
I think it can go either way. Often yes and often no. I think that there are a lot of great folks in the blockchain community who are working really, really hard to make blockchain systems things that genuinely distribute power, that have the potential to avoid centralization. But I don't think that we can ever put too much stock in the idea that a particular technology is going to deliver us from the need to build inclusive social systems, or that it will sort of by itself autonomously ensure that power isn't concentrated. Blockchain systems, I mean, if you just look at the first 10 years of blockchain, I mean, one of the most obvious things that it has done is to put a lot of concentrated wealth into the hands of a fairly small number of people who got in on it early. So that seems contrary to the highest ideals that it professes, and so I think that it can be an incredibly amazing thing, but we need to be careful not to sort of fall for cyber utopianism, not to be too credulous about the optimistic claims about what technology.
All right. Well, thank you very much, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
By the way, we're going to have another second panel, blockchain as antitrust code. I invite you who's watching to this presentation to participate and to see whether the second panel will answer the blockchain is the solution or is one of the solutions. Well, thank you very much, Matt. Very clever and instructive presentation. Thank you all for watching us, and see you in the next panel.
Thanks so much.